Good afternoon. I'm Nicholas Johnston. I'm the publisher of Axios. Thank you so much for joining us here. This is our very first Axios House at Climate Week. We've got 3 or 4 days of tremendous programming here. We're in the thick of it. So thank you all so much for joining us. We're always very, very grateful to our partners who make everything we do at Axios possible. The investments we make in our journalism, events like this, that's all thanks to our partners. So a huge, huge thanks to GE Vernova for making this conversation happen today. So I'm very excited to welcome for a view from the top conversation, GE Vernova CEO, Scott Strazik. Scott, welcome to the Axios stage.
Thanks for having me.
Great to see you again. Let's start big picture. We're talking optimism here today. Sometimes the climate transition gets a bad rap. Grid failures, extreme weather. Tell us your sense of optimism. What underlies that?
Well, I think growth creates a lot of opportunity for us when you think about that, and the innovation and the ability for an ecosystem to really challenge itself to work differently on a go-forward basis. I've been in the industry for over a decade, and when I think about where we sit in Cambridge, Mass. at our corporate headquarters today, you don't have to go far in that neighborhood to see a lot of innovation that's happening, whether on the MIT campus, whether it be places like Greentown Labs. I see some folks from there here. The engine with incredible opportunities to have an impact on the world, but that needs to figure out how to do it at scale and industrialize that at impact. And I think a lot of those forces are starting to come together in a different way because they have to, because of the realization of the challenges the world has.
You guys folks literally put on your website, I think the two places where how you view these coming together. It's decarbonization and electrification. And
Yeah.
I think we're at the start of that. Tell us how those two things work together.
You bet.
In your mind.
And you know, we are very intentional to start with electrification in a sense, because it'd be very easy to just turn the lights off, but that's not going to help the world. We need to figure out how to continue to create more supply of electricity while decarbonizing it quickly. So, you know, take our gas business as an example. We do power about half of the install base in the world for gas. Do we turn it off, or do we figure out how to decarbonize it? And that's why we're investing so much money today in hydrogen combustion. That's why we're spending so much money today on carbon capture, because the reality is we need to further electrifying the world while figuring out a way to decarbonize it. And with the demand that we see for the world today, it's going to be more about how do we add to what already exists while we clean up a lot of what's already there if we have any chance at meeting both goals.
It's almost like two sides of the same coin. Like the need to electrify, the need for more electricity can be hand in hand with the decarbonization if that's what the new technologies are bringing to the grid.
No question. I was having breakfast with a customer this morning, and you know, he's been a leader in the industry for 35 years, and he mentioned it's the first time that as he's working on projects, it's actually additive to the system versus someone being a net loser with every project he would get done. Because for him today, he's doing a ton of wind and solar, but in parallel, it doesn't mean something that's already on the grid needs to come off. It means what's already on the grid needs to become less carbon intense every day. And if we can do both of those things together, continue to add more and more zero carbon power while reducing the carbon intensity of what we've got, we can make a lot of progress quickly.
There's a word you've used when we've talked before about this, where we're at the start of a super cycle. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, in my lifetime, when you think about real investment super cycles, think about globalization in the 80s and 90s. Think about software and the internet in the 2000s and the 2010s, and how much that sculpted a change in economies, a change in workforces, a change in really how we live. The reality is the amount of investment that's required to transform the electric power system is going to have very similar impacts on jobs, on economies, on winners and losers. And that's why it's so important right now that we continue to lean in with both innovation, but also different forms of partnerships to solve these big problems.
A key element of this is sustainability. I know you folks released your first sustainability report last week. Tell us how that fits into that, how you think about it as a CEO.
It does start, everything with us starts with sustainability, but we talked a little bit about the electrification and the decarb, but it's more than just that. For us, we also talk a lot about thrive. We need to operate in communities that those communities thrive because we're doing business in those places, and that's from the perspective of safety. That's from the perspective of diversity. And simultaneously, while we're making those investments in those communities, how do we conserve and get more and more efficient every day? So for us, it's more electricity every year with less carbon attached to that electricity in communities that feel like they're winners with operations that get more efficient every year. And if we can do that, we're pretty confident we can have a real impact on the world.
So I think we know where you are now. What's great about Climate Week is that this is a room filled with people who care and can move the needle
Agreed.
on it. So how can they help? Give a call to action to these folks.
This is, we use a term inside the company a lot of a decade of action. I think it's important that we don't depend on some magic wand to solve this problem or to set grandiose long-term goals and a silver bullet to come in and fix this. We need to take advantage of this decade of action with what we have, with the technology that exists to accelerate it and to work together in different ways. And if we do that, we'll move the needle. And I mean, how do you eat an elephant? Bite by bite, piece by piece. And that's what we've got to do with this. And if we go about it with that mentality, we can make an incredible amount of progress.
I mean, a decade is a long time. Are there shorter term ways that you look at it? Are there shorter term things that people should think about more immediately on these things?
I think it's the same. I think it's the same analogy. I mean, the reality is the technology's there. We're making an incredible amount of progress. So how do we nurture an ecosystem that allows it to thrive? And we do that together as a business community, as government, as NGOs. It's there for the taking, and it doesn't take a decade. It's stuff that we can do now. The technology is accelerating quickly, and it's helped by the growth cycle that we're in to accelerate even faster tomorrow than it did yesterday. So I like our chances.
Yeah, so let's bring this full circle then. Put all this together and kind of give us a bottom line to take out of why you are so optimistic, how all these things come together to give you a sense of like in 10 years it'll be better than it is today.
I think it just goes back to what we've talked about. I mean, this has been a very flat demand environment for a while. It's harder to kind of create, to adjust or really impact the trajectory when a demand cycle is reasonably flat. We're in a clear upcycle of demand, and that, frankly, increases the burden of responsibility, but also opportunity for us as a system to fix this.
That's almost an irony in it, in that a rising demand for electricity actually creates the incentives and the ability to make those kinds of investments.
To me, it's one of the more contradictory things I feel like I've seen in the US the last 6 months. People are almost scared of the growth. The growth is the only thing that's going to give us a chance to actually address this. So yes, electricity demand is going to go up, but that's creating the opportunity for us to restructure the entire system. So we don't want to be afraid of rising electricity demand. That's exactly what we need. And by the way, that electricity demand growing is net decarbonizing other parts of our economy that are generally dirtier. So this is forcing the electric power system at a scaled level to have an even bigger impact where we can, because the technologies exist. So this is there for the taking.
You nailed it with a pretty good synopsis of how to be optimistic. So before we get the hook here, we're going to end on one fun thing. As we're looking 10 years into the future, when I go home back to DC and tell my kids what I've been doing all week, tell me something cool I can tell them about the energy transition. What's a cool piece of tech that's cooking that'll impress my 13-year-old daughter?
There's a lot of cool tech. I think it starts, I've got a 12-year-old son, a 10-year-old daughter.
How do you impress him?
Yeah. My son loves to ski. I start there and I'm like, if we don't get this right, that skiing's going to change. And I mean it, right? So he's paying attention. But then once he's paying attention, there's a lot of neat things. We could go to our research center in upstate New York right now and we'd see a direct air capture facility that's pulling carbon out of the air today. Right adjacent to that facility, we're pulling water out of the air, a system that we built for troops in remote parts of the world. We can do this with the technology. Now, industrializing it at scale, we've got some work to do.
I think that's the real question. There's all these ideas that are now here. The next 10 years are going to be getting them exactly to your point at scale.
But with growth, that's when you have a much better chance to actually industrialize things at scale, because then there's no excuses. When you're in a flat to down market, it's a lot harder to build a supply chain to solve that problem. In a growth market, the excuses are gone. So that's exactly why we're going to take it on.
Scott, thanks for being here. Huge thanks to GE Vernova for making this possible. We're going to get Andrew Friedman back up here for the big finish. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.